Samuel and I had been married for 30 years, yet we had never made it public. We had agreed that on the opening night of his latest play, Falling Leaves, we would finally tell the world. We had been husband and wife for 3 decades. That evening I planned to arrive at the theater on time, to witness the moment firsthand. But traffic was horrendous. I sat in the back of a cab watching the minutes tick by, my anxiety growing with each passing second. Then as I absently scrolled through my phone, a headline caught my eye. Samuel had made a big announcement to the local news. But the topic? Not about our marriage exposure but about his first love had returned. That woman, Autumn. Back in college, she and Samuel had a passionate love affair. After graduation, they pursued careers in theater together, achieving modest success. But then she moved to Europe and as far as anyone knew, she never returned. Till now. She appeared at the opening night of Samuel's play, Falling Leaves, a bouquet of fresh flowers in hand. She walked straight to the edge of the stage and personally handed them to him. Samuel stood under the spotlight, gazing at her with an unmistakable tenderness in his eyes. The audience erupted in applause. Some were even moved to tears. They called it a love that had endured 4 decades. Me. I sat in the back of a cab watching the rain streak down the window, unsure whether I should still go to the theater, whether I should ruin what seemed like a perfect reunion. For 30 years I had stood in Samuel's shadow. I had abandoned my own career, devoted myself to him, transformed from a young woman into someone with silver strands in her hair. The years of exhaustion had taken their toll on my body. And in the end, what did I get in return? 2 months ago Samuel had told me himself, "Amelia, I think it's time. Let's make our marriage public when the play premieres." I had been stunned, overjoyed even. I carefully took out the blue dress he had given me when we got engaged, pressing out every crease. I made all the necessary arrangements, handled the housework, sent our son off to Germany, so that for once I could dedicate myself fully to this long-awaited night. But as I rushed through the rain, umbrella in hand, my phone rang. Samuel's assistant. His voice was hurried. "Amelia, if you haven't arrived yet, don't bother coming. Samuel's got something urgent to deal with." "What?" I stopped in my tracks. "I don't have much time to explain. So, goodbye." The line went dead. I stood there, frozen, my fingers tightening around the bouquet I had brought for Samuel. Just then a notification flashed across my screen. Local theater star Samuel reunites with his first love after 40 years. An emotional, heartwarming moment. I clicked on the news. The video showed Samuel standing in the spotlight, radiant, holding the flowers Autumn had given him. His gaze never wavered from her, as if the world had faded away, leaving only the two of them. The comments were filled with admiration. Now this is love. 40 years later and she's still the only one he sees. This is more romantic than the movies. And I stood on a freezing street corner, staring at the screen, silent tears slipping down my face. Falling Leaves. Autumn. Last I understood. Samuel hadn't chosen this play for the art, for the audience, or for his career. He had chosen it for her. Even if all he could have was a title that carried her name. Me. What was I? For 40 years, from 25 to 65, I had given my entire life to Samuel. I had walked away from my career in medicine, pouring every ounce of myself into supporting him. 3 decades of devotion. And what did I get? The rain trickled through my hair, blurring my vision. A wave of dizziness swept over me. The bouquet slipped from my hands, landing on the wet pavement. I staggered into a small convenience store and sank into a chair, my body too drained to carry me any further. I had spent my whole life working, sacrificing for my family, for my child. But never, not once, had I truly lived for myself. Why had I let myself become this? Samuel and I were never meant to be part of the same world. He was a theater major, an aspiring actor. I was a medical student. It was the 80s, back when entertainment options were scarce. By day I wore a white coat, making my rounds as a hospital intern. By night I attended vocal classes at the local night school just for fun. Samuel was a struggling young actor at the time. He spent his days playing nameless roles in community theater and his nights working as a part-time music instructor at the very night school I attended. That was how we met. He had one of those effortlessly charming faces, the kind that lit up like sunlight dancing on a lake when he smiled. That winter he showed up at my doorstep, shivering in the cold, holding a cake box in his hands. "This is for your parents," he said. The packaging was from an upscale French patisserie, one I knew didn't come cheap. Samuel had probably spent 2 days' wages on it. He didn't say much. Just set the cake on the table and left. That was all it took for my parents to change their opinion of him. They saw him as sincere, dependable. Before long we were engaged. After our wedding I continued my medical career. A few grueling years of internship later, I finally became a full-fledged doctor. Samuel's theater career was also gaining traction, though we were still struggling financially. He couldn't afford an assistant, hesitated to spend money on a decent suit. I agonized over the decision for a long time, but in the end, I quit my job at the hospital to become his full-time assistant. I helped him memorize lines, scheduled his appointments, ironed his shirts, cooked his meals, managed every little detail of his life, so he could focus entirely on chasing his dream. One night as he sat at the dinner table staring at the dishes I'd carefully prepared, his eyes turned red. He took my hand in his. "Amelia, you've done so much for me. I'll never be able to repay you." I smiled, shaking my head. That's what marriage is, supporting each other. Just like that, 10 years passed. And in those 10 years, I heard Samuel's name tied to Autumn's more times than I could count. They had been college sweethearts once. They broke up. But his fans never let the story die. Over the years, the women by his side only grew more dazzling, and the rumors about him never stopped. So I chose to believe in him. They're just co-stars. It's work. I'm the one he married. Samuel isn't that kind of man. Even when I was in labor, clutching the hospital sheets in pain, he was away on tour. Even when I saw him on stage, looking at another woman with a smile so tender, eyes so full of emotion, I told myself, it's just acting. Samuel insisted on keeping our marriage a secret. "Amelia, can't you understand? I'm at a critical point in my career. When the time is right, we'll make it public, okay?" He said it so matter-of-factly as if I were the unreasonable one. He told me everything about Autumn, swore their past was long behind him. He pulled me into his arms, his voice a soft murmur against my hair. "I promised, didn't I? I'll take care of you for the rest of my life. Trust me." And I believed him. I thought this was just how our life would be, quiet, steady, enduring. Even if he was gone most of the year. Even if his name kept getting linked to other women. I told myself it was all for our family, that he was working so hard for us. But now that my youth was gone, now that my hair was turning gray, I finally saw the truth. I had spent a lifetime believing in a man who was never mine to begin with. I don't remember how I got home that night. All I remember is that for 2 whole days Samuel never called. Not a single explanation. Not even a half-hearted, "Are you okay?" On the 3rd day he finally came home, dragging his exhausted body through the door. I was sitting in the living room, the TV on, though I wasn't watching. Normally, the moment he stepped in, I'd greet him with a warm smile, ask if he wanted tea, tell him dinner was ready. But this time I didn't move. Samuel changed out of his clothes and walked over, his tone as gentle as ever. "What's for dinner?" "Smells amazing." I let out a soft laugh. This man, he really lived in his own world. Every time he came home I would wake up early, go to the market, pick out the freshest ingredients and cook a full spread of home-cooked dishes. But after years of dining on steak and lobster at high-end restaurants, did my humble meals even register in his mind? He'd always throw out the same casual compliments. "Wow, no one cooks better than you." But I knew those words were just habit, nothing more. There was a time when they made me happy for an entire day. Now I just found them laughable. I looked up at the man I had stood beside for 30 years and asked slowly, "Sam, do you actually like the food I cook?" Samuel seemed caught off guard. He hesitated, then chuckled, reaching for my hand. "What's this about? You sound like a jealous 20-year-old. I withdrew my hand before he could touch me. "Where did you go after the play's opening night?" His smile froze. Loosening his cuffs, he answered in a deliberately casual tone, "Yeah, I know I told you we'd go public that night, but you were late. So I had my assistant call and tell you not to come. And then..." He frowned slightly. "Amelia, I had urgent matters to take care of. I didn't have time to explain. That was my mistake. Let's not fight over this, okay? If this had been before, I would have given in. I would have told myself that a marriage required patience, that for the sake of our child, I shouldn't hold it against him. But this time I wasn't going to let it go. I repeated calmly, I asked where you went after the play. Samuel finally looked at me, his expression shifting. Annoyance flickered in his eyes. Amelia, are you seriously checking up on me now? We're not kids anymore. Can you stop acting like this? Acting like this? I let out a quiet laugh. Then take a look at this. I reached for the stack of photos, printed screenshots from last night's social media buzz. One by one I laid them out on the table. They captured Samuel stepping off stage, walking side by side with Autumn to a nearby restaurant. They ordered Autumn's favorite red wine, shared a perfect dinner together, and in one of picture he was leaning in, kissing her on the cheek. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't throw a fit. I simply looked at him and repeated his own words back to him. We're not kids anymore. Can you stop acting like this? Samuel's face darkened instantly. He grabbed the photos, flipping through them. His expression twisted, the polite mask he always wore slipping away. Amelia, you had me followed? He slammed the pictures back onto the table. Autumn and I were just catching up. Why do you always make a big deal out of nothing? Then he shoved his chair back, stormed out the door, and left nothing but silence behind. I didn't understand. Why is it that some people can do wrong and still be the ones who lash out in anger? And more than that, why had I never questioned it before? The next few days I didn't leave the house. I didn't check my phone. Samuel didn't call. He didn't text. Even the landline remained silent. Was he genuinely upset? Or did he simply not care? It didn't matter anymore. Not anymore. I sat by the window, sunlight streaming onto my hands. For 30 years I had been busy managing the house, taking care of the kids, and preparing Samuel's schedules for his performances. But now I finally sat in silence, sewing a new apron for myself. For the first time in 30 years I was doing something just for me. Then suddenly the phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw Jack's name, my son. Ever since he went to Germany to study, he rarely called. So I was a bit surprised when I saw his name pop up. I picked up the phone. Hello. Mom, did you and Dad have a fight? He asked bluntly. I furrowed my brow. Why do you ask? These past few days, Dad hasn't been posting anything in the family chat. He usually takes a picture of every little thing, like when he buys coffee at the store, and shares it. But for the last few days there hasn't been a single message. I paused, trying to keep my tone light. Nothing's wrong. Don't worry about it, just focus on your studies. But Jack wasn't buying it. His voice suddenly became sharper. Are you sure there's nothing going on? Dad called me. He said you've been cold with him lately. I fell silent. Mom, what are you really thinking? Jack continued. Are you sure you're not misunderstanding? Autumn is just Dad's old friend. They bumped into each other, it's no big deal. She even helped me before I left for Germany. She's a nice person, you can't keep doubting her. I gripped the phone tighter, my fingers turning white. Why don't you just apologize to Dad? Jack's tone became impatient. This thing should be over. It's better for all of us to be happy as a family than for you to keep throwing a tantrum. I slowly walked out onto the balcony, gazing into the distance. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the mountain shadows. It was so beautiful it hurt. I took a deep breath, and when I spoke my voice was unnervingly calm. Jack, your dad's a fool. But I never imagined you'd be one too. The line went quiet. I've spent so many years giving everything for this family, and in the end I'm being blamed by both of you, I said, my voice unwavering, more determined than it had ever been. From now on I'm done serving this family. From this moment on I'm living for myself. I didn't hesitate to hang up the phone. It was the first time I allowed myself to be angry. Surprisingly, after saying those words, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. That evening I went to bed early to rest. For the past few days Samuel and I had been in a silent standoff, neither of us willing to make the first move. I thought he would find another excuse to go out, come back smelling of some perfume from a social gathering, pretending like nothing had happened. But to my surprise he came home early that night. I lay in bed listening to the sound of him rummaging around in the kitchen. What was he doing? Before long the bedroom door creaked open slightly, and a warm beam of light spilled into the room. Samuel stood in the doorway, his face covered in flour, his voice cautious. Amelia, I can't find the salt. Can you come help me look for it? I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. But I still got up and walked to the kitchen. What I saw there made me stop in my tracks. The kitchen was a disaster. Water was boiling over in the pot, half-sliced onions were scattered on the cutting board, and the knife, which he had clearly struggled with, was a mess. I stared at him, completely at a loss for words. Samuel awkwardly smiled, pushing a bowl on the table toward me. I haven't cooked in years. Do you want to try it? I stared at the clumpy noodles in the bowl, but inside I felt nothing. He wasn't lowering himself because he was afraid of losing me. He was afraid that he'd never find someone like me, someone who could take care of him for so long. For 30 years he never needed to remember where the salt was or worry about any household chores. Because of me, he only needed to speak and the food would be on the table, the clothes washed and ironed, and everything at home would run smoothly. He was just used to those conveniences, not to losing me. I slowly pushed the bowl of noodles back toward him, looking up and speaking in a calm tone. Sam, I don't want to eat this now. And I don't want to eat it ever again. Then almost casually I added, let's live separate lives from now on. Samuel's face froze. He probably never imagined I would say something like that. He stood there, stunned, for a long while before forcing a smile as if trying to soothe the child. Amelia, stop joking around. But I knew I wasn't joking. I had had enough. I didn't say anything else. I just looked at Samuel, my eyes firm and resolute. He froze, completely taken aback by my decisiveness. Amelia, do you really think it's appropriate to say something like that? He widened his eyes in disbelief, as if he had heard the most outrageous thing. 30 years of love and you don't even care? You're going to make a fuss over something so small? Small thing? He called it a small thing? He had kept our marriage hidden for 30 years, kept me in the dark for 3 decades, and had no hesitation when accepting flowers from his first love on stage. Was that really a small thing? Seeing that I didn't respond, Samuel's tone grew even more severe. I hope you'll think carefully. At your age, you need to take responsibility for what you say. There was again. He always played the age card. As if a woman, once she reached a certain age, was meant to accept her fate, stop overthinking, and stay quietly at home, continuing to serve as his domestic assistant. I smiled, not bothering to argue. I simply turned around, went back to the bedroom, and made my decision. The next morning I dialed Harper's number. She was a good kid, smart and hardworking since she was young. The moment she picked up, her voice rose with excitement. Mom, have you finally decided to come visit me? He called me Mom. But she wasn't my biological daughter. Harper was an orphan I had sponsored after an earthquake in the early 2000s. She had studied relentlessly, earned scholarships, and eventually made a life for herself, opening a small inn in Colorado, becoming her own boss. She had invited me to stay with her more times than I could count, but I always made excuses. Too much to do, too many responsibilities at home. But now what was there left to hold me back? Yes, I said with a smile. I've finally made up my mind. I booked a flight for tomorrow. That's amazing. Harper's excitement was palpable. I'll pick you up from the airport myself. After hanging up, I started packing. Digging through my closet, I found a blue trench coat I hadn't worn in years, the one I had bought for myself a long time ago. Back then I was young, drawn to bright colors. But after marrying Samuel, he insisted that darker tones were more appropriate for a married woman. So I pushed the coat to the back of the closet and never took it out again. I ran my fingers over the fabric. It was still soft, still warm. I folded it neatly and placed it in my suitcase. Just as I zipped it shut, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and froze. Standing outside was Autumn. She looked as polished as ever, a silk scarf draped around her neck, her makeup flawless, a small smile playing on her lips. Amelia, she said softly. Can we talk? I didn't respond, but I stepped aside and let her in. The house was quiet. Samuel had left early for his rehearsals. It was just the two of us facing each other in the living room. I poured her a cup of tea and waited. Autumn lifted the cup, blowing gently on the surface. Samuel's assistant mentioned that you two were planning to announce your marriage on opening night. She sighed, voice laced with mock sympathy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disrupt your plans. There was an unmistakable glint in her eyes, a hint of amusement behind her apology. I kept a faint smile on my lips and said nothing. She placed her teacup down with a soft clink. If Samuel had told me about it last month, I wouldn't have shown up that night. Such a coincidence, isn't it? My stomach dropped. Last month? So Samuel had known she was coming all along. And he hadn't told me. He would rather lie, make excuses to keep me away than simply say no to her. That night on stage she had stood before the audience and said, "These flowers should have been given away 20 years ago." Only I understood what she truly meant. For the longest time, I had believed Samuel had carefully chosen me. But now I saw the truth. I had simply been the right choice, the convenient choice. 40 years ago Samuel and Autumn had a love that burned bright, but their constant fights tore them apart. And then I appeared. I was gentle, understanding. I never fought, never caused trouble. I was willing to sacrifice, willing to orbit around him. So he married me. But he had never truly loved me. I hadn't wanted to believe it. Not even when years ago at a dinner party one of Samuel's friends got drunk and offhandedly said, "If Samuel and Autumn hadn't broken up, you two wouldn't have even happened." Back then I dismissed it. Now I couldn't anymore. Autumn leaned back, a satisfied smile on her lips. "Amelia, don't blame Samuel. He's always had me in his heart." She lifted her cup, taking a slow sip. "You were just the right person, the one who happened to be there when he needed someone." Her words were light, effortless, like she was simply stating a fact. I stared at my tea, then let out a quiet laugh. "For decades I gave Samuel everything," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Not because I couldn't live without him, but because I thought he was worth it." I met her gaze and smiled. "But now I see it clearly, he's nothing more than a weak, selfish man." A flicker of something passed through Autumn's eyes. Surprise. Maybe even irritation. She hadn't expected me to be this composed. I tilted my head slightly, lips curling into a small, almost amused smile. "And for that," I added lightly, "I should really thank you, Autumn, for taking out the trash." Her expression finally cracked. She opened her mouth as if to retort but hesitated. Instead she gave a tight, forced smile, grabbed her purse and walked out the door. I watched her leave, feeling lighter than I had in years. This ridiculous farce was finally coming to an end. I grabbed my suitcase and let out a long breath. It was time to go. On the entryway table I left a signed divorce agreement. No note. No explanation. No farewell. If he wanted to sign it, just sign it anyway. I didn't care anymore. The moment I stepped off the plane, I spotted Harper waiting at the exit. As soon as she saw me, she broke into a run and wrapped me in a tight hug. "Mom." Her voice trembled slightly, thick with emotion. "It's only been a few years, but why do you look like you've aged so much?" I froze for a second, instinctively raising a hand to my hair. The glass window reflected my image back at me, once thick, dark hair now streaked heavily with silver. I let out a small, bitter smile. I hadn't aged suddenly. I had been worn down little by little over the years. Harper seemed to realize her words had been poorly chosen and quickly corrected herself, looping her arm through mine with a bright smile. No, Mom, you're not old at all. You're just tired. Give it some time. Once you relax, you'll look younger than ever." I nodded, allowing her to take my hand and lead me outside the airport. The golden hues of the setting sun stretched long through the glass windows, casting a warm glow over us. For a brief moment, the warmth in my palm made me feel disoriented, as if I had been pulled back in time. A long time ago Jack used to hold my hand just like this as we walked home together. Jack had been so attached to me when he was little, such a bright and well-behaved child. But everything changed when he hit his teenage years. He became obsessed with video games, his grades plummeted, and our conversations grew shorter and colder. The distance between us widened. And what did Samuel do? Every time I tried to discipline Jack, Samuel would just wave it off with a laugh. "He's just a kid. Boys play games, it's no big deal." But he's completely neglecting his studies. I'd argue, my frustration mounting. Samuel would only shrug. "So what? If he doesn't go the academic route, it's not like we can't afford to support him." And Jack, emboldened, would nod in agreement. "Gee, Mom, you don't get me at all. Dad's the only one who understands." I would be left shaking my head in helplessness, worrying about Jack's future alone, because no one else seemed to care. But now I didn't have to worry anymore. No more battles to fight, no more sleepless nights spent agonizing over things I couldn't change. For the first time in years, I had been sleeping soundly, undisturbed by the weight of responsibilities I no longer had to carry. Harper was thoughtful, taking time off to show me around. We stayed in a cozy cabin nestled in the Colorado mountains, wandered through wildflower-covered meadows, and gazed at the endless stretch of snow-capped peaks. We sat by a quiet lake for an entire afternoon, saying nothing, just breathing in the fresh mountain air. Blue skies, rolling hills, a gentle breeze, the sound of the stream. How had I never experienced this before? Why had I spent the last 30 years living like a prisoner, trapped in a kitchen shackled by duty? For the first time I picked up a camera, not to capture meals or schedules or anything for anyone else, but simply to hold on to these moments. To remember the view. To remember Harper's bright, carefree laughter beneath the sunlight. For the first time I felt I was free. Not long after, Samuel finally signed the divorce papers. Our last conversation was about that. At the end of the call, his voice was cold as he spat out, "Amelia, you're being impulsive. One day you'll regret this." I let out a quiet laugh and didn't bother responding. But half a month later I finally understood what he meant by regret. The internet exploded. Samuel's longtime fans flooded social media with pictures of him and Autumn together. They stood close, seemingly lost in their own world, their body language intimate. One bold fan even asked Samuel directly, "What's your relationship with Autumn now?" He simply smiled, neither confirming nor denying. But Autumn? She posted a picture of them holding hands on her own account, captioned, "Grateful for the way time carves our lives, leaving us with beautiful stories and a warmth that never fades." The internet went wild. Now this is true love. After 40 years, they finally found their way back to each other. Romance that lasts a lifetime. Samuel and Autumn were meant to be. Amelia? Who's that? Samuel never even made his marriage public. Clearly she was never the one. I read the comments, yet I felt nothing. Then on Autumn's 60th birthday, Samuel personally cooked an entire meal of her favorite home-cooked dishes. The same Samuel who once couldn't even fry an egg now stood in a kitchen, carefully preparing a meal filled with love just for her. I chuckled softly, switched off my phone and continued rinsing the fresh blueberries in my basket. But what truly chilled me wasn't the pictures. It was Jack. He had flown back for Autumn's birthday celebration. And on his way home he sent me a message. "Mom, you're the one who chose to walk away from this marriage. Dad and Autumn are just pursuing their happiness. Don't go causing trouble for them later. You're too old to be getting a divorce. Aren't you afraid of becoming a joke?" I stared at the screen, feeling nothing but cold indifference. This is how the world works. When a man makes a choice, it's seen as pursuing happiness. But when a woman reaches a certain age, she is expected to accept her circumstances. She is told she can't chase after anything anymore. She should simply endure without complaint, without resistance. But I was no longer that woman. Silently, I turned off my phone, picked up my basket, and continued washing the blueberries Harper and I had gathered today. Across the kitchen, Harper's face was flushed with anger. "Mom, this is ridiculous. How can they treat you like this? You should expose everything. Let the world know you were hidden for 30 years. Let them see the truth." I smiled, shaking my head. It doesn't matter anymore. One of the best things about reaching this age is finally seeing everything clearly. I had taken too many wrong turns, endured too much pain, swallowed too much humiliation. I wasn't going to waste another second of my time or energy on people who weren't worth it. Because now I finally understood. The rest of my life was meant for something far greater. After the divorce, I received a substantial amount of money. Samuel had always been stingy, keeping a firm grip on our finances. Over the years, I had almost no personal savings. Every penny went into running the household. But this time he had no choice but to give me what was rightfully mine. I had always lived simply. There was no way I could spend all that money on myself. So after some thought, I made a decision. I would donate part of it to an elementary school in a low-income community, ensuring that the children had better access to educational resources. When Harper heard about it, she was fully on board. "Mom, I'm coming with you." We drove to the community school, a small institution in a quiet town. The buildings were old, the paint on the rooftops peeling away. Some of the windows had cracks in the glass. The bulletin board at the entrance was filled with handwritten fundraising notices. They were short on funds, unable to afford even the latest textbooks. Seeing it all, my heart clenched. When we stepped into a classroom, a group of children was huddled around a worn-out wooden table, sharing a single book as they worked on their assignments. Their eyes were focused, serious, like that book was their gateway to the world. "Hello." I greeted them with a warm smile. The children hesitated for a second before breaking into bright grins. "Hello, ma'am." The principal, an elderly woman with a warm spirit, shook my hand repeatedly when she heard about the donation. "You have no idea what this means for our children. With this money we can buy new books, renovate the reading room, and even offer more after-school tutoring." I smiled and nodded. Later that afternoon, during a small community talk, I shared stories about the world beyond their small town. I told them that their futures should never be defined by their background, their circumstances, or even by marriage. A timid little girl raised her hand and softly asked, "Amelia, how do you know if you're living a life that has value?" I looked at her, my voice gentle yet firm. "You learn. You grow. You make yourself strong. And through your own efforts, you shape your life into what you want it to be." Stepping down from the small stage, I scanned the faces around me, my smile deepening. Look at me, I'm nearly 60. But I can still choose my own path, still do things that matter. Their eyes shone with understanding, with inspiration. And in that warm, sunlit library, amidst those eager young faces, I saw it. Hope quietly taking root. Meanwhile, the fairy tale romance between Samuel and Autumn was beginning to crumble. They had planned to marry in 3 months, believing they were writing the perfect ending to their late-life love story. At first they reveled in the nostalgia, convinced they had recaptured their youth. But reality moves faster than love, and it is always far more ruthless. Once they started living together, small disagreements began to surface, growing like cracks in a wall until they became impossible to ignore. Autumn didn't cook, so they kept a housekeeper. Samuel was allergic to cat hair, but Autumn insisted on keeping her cat, and no matter how much he tried to persuade her, she refused to part with it. He told himself love was about compromise, about accepting the small habits that made a person who they were. But small habits have a way of turning into big problems. And then one day the inevitable happened. Their housekeeper called in for a week off. No one cooked. No one cleaned. Samuel came home after a long day, exhausted, only to find the kitchen cold and untouched, the dining table bare, not even a bowl of fruit. And there was Autumn sitting on the couch, leisurely sipping her tea. Samuel frowned, walking up to her. "Susan's not here. Couldn't you at least try to cook something?" Autumn didn't even look up. "Why would I? Susan usually handles that. And besides, restaurants exist for a reason." Samuel took a deep breath, frustration creeping into his voice. "Autumn, can you at least make an effort? I'm already dealing with enough. I don't need to come home and worry about this too." Autumn set her teacup down and finally met his gaze, her expression unimpressed. "Samuel," she said coolly, "I am not your maid." The room fell into silence. Samuel froze. For the first time he realized he had spent his life taking things for granted. For 30 years he never had to worry about laundry or meals. He never had to remember appointments or organize his day-to-day life. As I had been the one doing it all. But the woman standing in front of him now wasn't me. Autumn wasn't Amelia. She wasn't going to take care of him. She wasn't going to dedicate 30 years of her life to making his easier. All this time Samuel had believed his life ran smoothly because that was just the way things were. Now he finally understood. His smooth life had only existed because I had been the one smoothing out all the rough edges. But there was no undoing what had already been done. He once had a woman who loved him without hesitation, who gave him everything, who dedicated herself to making his life seamless. But he had been the one to push her away. And that woman, she had stepped into a world far bigger than his, living a life entirely her own. Sometime later the internet caught fire. At first no one knew about Samuel's 30-year secret marriage, or the fact that he had been entangled with Autumn even while we were still together. But secrets never stay buried. Some sharp-eyed users spotted clues on Jack's social media, pieced the timeline together and uncovered the full truth. Samuel had hidden his marriage for 3 decades, let his wife sacrifice everything in silence, only to stand on stage and accept his ex-girlfriend's flowers before swiftly divorcing and rekindling their tragic romance. The news exploded overnight. The very people who had once cheered for Samuel and Autumn's love story reborn turned on him in an instant. This man has no conscience. 30 years of marriage in the dark, and the moment he's free he's holding hands with his ex? Who wouldn't be furious? He abandoned the wife who stood by him through everything, then had the audacity to act like some devoted lover. What a joke. Samuel's career took a massive hit. His plays were suddenly being cancelled or rescheduled. His once loyal fans were no longer waiting at the stage door. The exhaustion began to show on his face. For the first time, Samuel looked tired, worn, defeated. Late one night, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Samuel. Months had passed since the divorce. He had never called me before. I hesitated, then picked up. On the other end, Samuel's voice was low, exhausted, filled with a remorse I had never heard before. Amelia, come back. Let's get remarried. I promise I'll be better this time. I won't make you angry anymore. He took a deep breath. I finally understand now. After so many years together, how could I just let it go? I can't. His words were heartfelt. But my heart had long since stopped responding to him. Once I believed a husband was a woman's lifelong anchor. But now I had found my peace. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, Samuel and Jack showed up at Harper's Inn. I was outside in the courtyard, helping Harper hang freshly washed white bed sheets when their figures appeared at the entrance. Jack hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke. Mom, we were wrong before, he said. Dad and I have come to take you home. Will you come back with us? I lifted my gaze, looking past Jack to Samuel. He was a shadow of the man he used to be. He had lost weight, his hair streaked with gray. His posture had weakened, his once confident presence diminished. I smiled faintly and asked Jack, go back? Didn't you and your father just come back from somewhere? What about your studies? Jack quickly shook his head, his voice anxious. No. Autumn and Dad broke up a while ago. I only came here to help bring you back. If you two reconcile, I'll leave right away. I heard his words, yet I felt nothing. Samuel and Autumn were over? That was his problem, not mine. Just because he wanted to make peace with himself didn't mean I owed him my forgiveness. His regret was no longer worth even a flicker of my emotions. The sky darkened, clouds rolling in fast. Within moments, the first drops of rain began to fall. Harper ran out of the house carrying a basket. Mom, come inside. I'll handle the sheets. Jack and Samuel both stiffened at her words. Jack frowned, pointing at Harper with confusion all over his face. Mom, who is this woman? And why is she calling you Mom? Harper didn't hesitate. She set the basket down with a sharp thud, planted her hands on her hips and stood tall. They're divorced, she said flatly. Why are you here? My mom is doing just fine without you. The rain grew heavier as if the sky itself was agreeing with her. Samuel's face darkened. Jack's expression turned furious, clearly stung by her words. But I simply patted Harper's shoulder, silently signaling her to go inside. Then I finally turned to look at my former husband and son. Calm, steady, unwavering. I picked up a large umbrella, opened it and held it over them, shielding them from the rain. Then I spoke. Sam, go home. I've built a new life here. I'm not the woman who silently stood behind you anymore. Regret flickered in Samuel's eyes. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something. But in the end, no words came. Jack's face was tight with frustration, unable to understand why the mother he once knew had become someone so unyielding. But there were many things he didn't understand. And I no longer had the time or patience to explain, to appease, to wait. Quietly, I closed the umbrella, turned around and walked back inside. Harper followed right behind me, her eyes shining with admiration. A few days later, I received a letter. It was from the children at the school I had donated to. They had written it by hand. The handwriting was crooked and immature, yet full of sincerity. They told me that because of my donation, the library finally had new books and study materials. Every day they couldn't wait to rush into the library, eager to read more stories and learn more knowledge. Thank you, Amelia. We will study hard and become useful people in the future. We will never forget your kindness. I gently placed the letter on the table, my eyes welling up. Beside me were the white sheets Harper and I had hung out to dry, pure and new, releasing a faint, fresh scent in the sunlight. I knew my life had turned a new page. And Samuel's story was no longer a part of mine. At that very moment, Samuel's life was heading in a different direction. He had fallen ill. Not long after returning from Colorado, Samuel collapsed due to prolonged exhaustion and mental stress. Jack had to go back to school and couldn't take care of him, so he had to hire a professional caregiver. In autumn, she knew Samuel was ill, yet she never visited him. Instead, she continued attending social events, posting pictures of her gatherings with friends on social media, still looking glamorous. Samuel had been at the peak of his life for decades, but now in his sickbed he was alone. Maybe, just maybe, he had finally realized he would never find someone like me again. Someone who had been willing to accompany him unconditionally for so many years. That day, I happened to return to the city for a meeting with a charity organization leader. I had heard that Samuel was in the hospital, and after a moment of hesitation, I decided to stop by and visit him. He had lost even more weight since I last saw him. His eye sockets were sunken and his face was pale. When he saw me walk into the room, there was a glimmer of surprise and hope in his eyes. "You came to see me. You must still have feelings for our marriage, right?" I quietly watched him, my heart a mixture of emotions. The man who had once been full of vigor and confidence now lay weakly on the bed, eyes full of expectation and reluctance. I spoke softly, "Sam, I'm not here because I expect anything from you. I'm just passing by." A flicker of disappointment flashed in Samuel's eyes. He fell silent for a while before asking in a strained voice, "If that day at the curtain call, I hadn't been with her but was waiting for you on stage, would we have ended up like this?" I smiled gently, shaking my head. "Sam, the problem wasn't in that phone call. From 25 to 60, my life revolved around you. I gave up my career, gave up my dreams, and devoted myself entirely to taking care of you and the kids. But did you ever make the same sacrifices for me? You're always like this, only realizing the value of something once it's gone. Unfortunately, life doesn't give second chances, and that question has no answer. The years I had sacrificed couldn't be undone." I stood up, preparing to leave. Samuel's eyes were filled with reluctance. He tried to hold me back. "Amelia, will you come see me again?" I smiled softly, my tone calm. "Sam, our lives have already gone in different directions. I'll wish you well, but I won't come back." That was the last time we saw each other. Years later, the first time I heard anything about Samuel again was 5 years after our separation. Samuel had become the center of public discussion. Through his fans on social media, I learned about his life updates. He had been silent for 5 years due to illness, but now he returned to the public eye as a theater director. His play was about the story of a woman, one who had given everything for her family, who had been trapped in the mundane details of life, but in the end she found her own worth and chose freedom, living her true self. This story was so familiar to me that it made me smile with irony. Undoubtedly, the inspiration for the play came from me. On the opening night of his play, Samuel stood on stage and openly expressed his gratitude. His gaze was complex, filled with both emotion and regret. He said, "I want to thank someone. She quietly sacrificed for decades in my life. When I was at my lowest, she came to my side, gave up her bright future, took care of the household and cared for the kids so that I could focus on my career without worry. This work is a reflection of the past and a hope for the future. I hope all the audience can feel how important it is to cherish those in front of you." I sat at home quietly watching the scene through my phone screen. Suddenly, I remembered a phone call from Jack years ago. "Mom, Dad wants to make a movie and the inspiration comes from you. He wants your approval." At that time, I was busy coordinating with a charity organization, planning to set up a children's reading corner in a school, focused entirely on how to create a better learning environment for the kids. So I casually responded, "Let him do it." And then I completely forgot about it. It wasn't until today, when I saw Samuel on the opening night of his play, that this long-forgotten detail resurfaced. Harper grabbed my hand and winked at me with a smile. "Mom, you're the leading lady in that play." I chuckled softly, not commenting on it. I was 60 years old, my silver hair gathered in an elegant bun, my spirits still lively. Every time I looked in the mirror, I felt younger than I had 5 years ago. I had to thank Samuel for that, because once I left him, I realized that my life was not just about endless household chores, but it was full of infinite possibilities and value. On the screen, Samuel's figure slowly blurred as he left the stage. But none of it mattered to me anymore. I turned off my phone and the screen faded to black. Harper looked at me in surprise. "Mom, aren't you going to watch it till the end?" I smiled faintly and walked over to the window, gazing at the deep blue sky. No need. I've already seen what I needed to see. Harper walked over and stood beside me. So what's next for you? I turned to look at her, a playful glint in my eyes. I'm thinking of learning to paint. Harper's eyes widened. Paint? That sounds like a great idea. I smiled and nodded. I've always wanted to try, but I was always too busy. Now I think it's time. Harper laughed heartily. I'll be waiting to see your masterpiece. A few days later, I enrolled in a painting course at a small local art studio. On the first day, I walked into the classroom with a mix of nervousness and excitement. The teacher, a young artist, looked at me with a hint of surprise. Welcome, ma'am. I returned his smile. In class, I picked up the brush, dipped it in paint, and gently began to apply it to the canvas. At first, my hand trembled slightly, but as time passed, I became immersed in the world of colors and lines. In that moment, I completely forgot everything from the past and became lost in the freedom of the present. On the last day of the course, I painted a blooming sunflower. It came to life on the canvas, its petals slightly open as though it was growing towards the sunlight. The teacher walked over, looking at my painting with satisfaction. Your work is full of life, just like the feeling you give me. After finishing the painting, I packed up my supplies and left the studio. The sunlight warmed my hair, giving me a sense of lightness and fulfillment that I had never experienced before. I walked down the street, already starting to plan my next travel destination. I think I want to go to the beach. To paint the endless ocean and the seagulls flying freely. Everything seemed so full of possibility. After all, life is always full of infinite opportunities.